Vince Gironda never had much patience for the so-called Big Three. In most gyms, the squat, bench, and deadlift were treated like gospel, but he saw them as the fastest way to ruin a physique. They built thickness where he thought it didn't belong, turning lifters into heavy, awkward shapes instead of polished athletes.
So this is Vince Gironda, a man who thought squats, bench presses, and deadlifts could actually make a bodybuilding physique worse. But that wasn't his only controversial idea. He created the brutal 8x8 system, pushed extremely low carbohydrate diets, had very unusual ideas about exercise selection, and completely rejected the direction bodybuilding was taking toward drugs and extreme mass. And while I was researching this video, I actually tried his 8x8 system myself. So today, I want to find out how much of Vince Gironda's philosophy still makes sense for the average lifter today. Was he genuinely ahead of his time, or was he sometimes just too extreme? Let's decode it.
To him, bodybuilding was never about how much iron you could move. It was about the way the body looked under the lights, the lines, the balance, the illusion that made muscle look like sculpture. The bench press was his prime target. He believed it overinflated the front delts, compressed the rib cage, and left the chest looking flat. The squat, he argued, thickened the hips and glutes until a man's proportions were ruined. And the deadlift, though impressive, did little for the kind of refined shape he wanted to see.
And this is the important distinction behind what Vince was saying. The objective of a powerlifter is to move the greatest amount of weight possible. But the objective of a bodybuilder is to develop the muscles in a way that improves the appearance of the physique. Those two goals can overlap, but they are not exactly the same thing. And I think Vince was very right about that distinction. A squat can build excellent legs. A bench press can build the chest. A deadlift can develop tremendous strength and thickness through the back. The real question is whether the exercise develops the areas you want, whether it suits your structure, and whether you can perform it safely and progressively.
At a time when most lifters chased heavy numbers, Vince chased refinement. He preached that it wasn't about lifting the most weight, but about sculpting a body that looked powerful and perfectly balanced. His philosophy went against everything the mainstream preached, but it gave his athletes a look that set them apart, and not just like powerlifters with tans.
That last line is brutal, but it explains Vince's entire philosophy. He didn't want a bodybuilder to look like a strongman who had simply reduced his body fat. He wanted balance, proportion, and a particular visual effect. For an ordinary lifter, the lesson isn't that you should immediately throw away the big exercises. The lesson is that you should know why an exercise is in your routine. Are you doing it because it develops the muscle you're trying to build? Or simply because somebody told you every serious lifter has to do it? Exercise selection should follow your goal. If an exercise develops the intended muscle, feels good on your joints, and allows you to progress, it might deserve a place in your program. Tradition alone isn't a good enough reason.
Now, if there's one thing Vince hated, it was wasted time in the gym. He believed workouts should be short and brutally effective, and that's where his most famous system came from, the 8x8 workout. It may sound simple, 8 sets of 8 reps for one exercise, but the catch? Your rest was cut down to 20 or 30 seconds between sets. That meant you weren't piling plates on the bar. You were using a moderate weight, moving fast, and letting the sheer density of work tear your muscles apart.
Now we get to the system most people associate with Vince Gironda. 8 sets of 8 repetitions with only 20 or 30 seconds between sets. That's 64 repetitions completed in a very short period of time. So the difficulty isn't coming from using the heaviest weight possible. It is coming from the density of the work. The weight might feel manageable during the first set, but after several sets with almost no recovery, that same weight starts to feel completely different.
Vince called it the honest workout because it humbled lifters. You couldn't fake your way through it. If you cheated on form or tried to ego lift, you'd be cooked by the third set. He also had other formulas: 6 times 6 for heavy density, 10-8-6-15 for shocking a muscle with varied loads, and countless supersets designed to keep you pumping nonstop. The pattern was always the same: minimal rest, maximum precision.
I understand why he called it the honest workout, because you can't use your normal working weight and expect to complete 8 clean sets with 20 seconds of rest. The system forces you to reduce the weight and control your ego. But there is an important detail the documentary doesn't explain. Were all 8 sets supposed to reach complete muscular failure? Because if you take the first set to absolute failure, rest 20 seconds, and then try to repeat it 7 more times, the repetitions are going to collapse very quickly. And your technique will probably collapse with them. So I don't think an ordinary lifter should interpret this as 8 maximum effort sets. And as I mentioned at the beginning, while I was researching this video, I decided to try the 8x8 myself. I have been experimenting with it for a couple of weeks on chest, back, shoulders, biceps, and triceps. And I can definitely understand why Vince called it the honest workout. With those short rest periods, it humbles you very quickly. It's hard and it gives the muscles a very different stimulus from what I am normally used to. I was very sore afterwards, but we know muscle soreness doesn't mean muscle growth. And neither does a workout simply feeling harder or different. For me, that only tells me that I exposed my body to a stimulus it wasn't accustomed to. Whether 8x8 actually works for me as a training method is a completely different question. To know that, I would have to follow it consistently for several weeks or months, recover properly, support it with good nutrition, and use a reliable and consistent way of measuring whether I am actually progressing. Otherwise, if I can't objectively compare where I started with where I finished, it becomes very difficult to judge the method properly. Because ultimately, a training method should be judged by whether it produces the results it claims to produce, not simply by how brutal it feels while you are doing it.
He wanted you breathing hard, muscles swollen, veins lit up, and form still perfect. And the philosophy behind it? Vince believed muscle was built by time under tension, by squeezing every ounce of work out of a rep until the target muscle had nothing left to give. That's why his athletes, like Larry Scott and Muhammad Makawi, walked on stage looking like that.
And that phrase is important. Form still perfect. The moment the shortened rest starts changing the movement, the target muscle may no longer be receiving the work Vince intended. Your breathing can become a limiting factor. Your grip can become a limiting factor. Or you may begin using momentum simply to survive the remaining sets. At that point, the workout may still feel brutally difficult. But difficult doesn't always mean productive. Where I do see value in this system is as a different form of progression. Progress doesn't always have to mean adding more weight. You could perform the same weight and repetitions with cleaner technique. You could complete all 8 sets without losing repetitions. Or you could gradually reduce the rest period while maintaining the same performance. That gives the lifter another measurable target besides simply adding plates to the bar. For a regular lifter, I wouldn't begin by using the 8 times 8 method on every exercise in the workout. I would choose one stable exercise, use a lighter weight than normal, control the rest precisely, and stop before technique breaks down. A machine, cable exercise, or controlled dumbbell movement may be more practical than something requiring a lot of balance, and setup. The system should challenge the target muscle. It shouldn't become a competition to see how much discomfort you can tolerate.
Vince Gironda didn't believe in carbs. He threw the grain out completely. That was the time when lifters were chugging milk by the gallon and bulking on pasta and bread. Vince told his athletes to strip everything back to the essentials. His solution? Steak and eggs, 2 meals a day. That's it. Steak and eggs cooked in butter, 6 days a week. Then on the seventh day, you'd have a carb refeed, a huge plate of pasta, fruit, maybe even dessert, before diving straight back into the cycle. To outsiders, it sounded like madness, almost like a caveman crash diet. But the bodies Vince produced told a different story. His lifters came in lean, tight, and dry, while their competitors still looked puffy and bloated from the bulking diets of the day. Step on stage next to one of Vince's guys, and you could see the difference immediately.
This is where the video starts opening another part of bodybuilding that we haven't really covered on the channel yet: nutrition. And I like that we are introducing it through Vince because for him, the diet wasn't separate from the training system. The goal was to remain lean, sharp, and ready. He didn't believe in gaining a huge amount of body weight and then spending months trying to remove the fat later. Again, everything came back to the appearance of the physique. But being strict doesn't automatically mean every part of the diet was optimal. Steak and eggs can provide a lot of protein and energy, and reducing highly processed carbohydrates might help some people control their food intake. But completely removing almost all carbohydrates isn't necessary for someone to become lean. And there is also an interesting contradiction here. Vince wanted people performing high density workouts with very short rest periods. That type of training can be demanding. Some lifters may perform perfectly well on a low carbohydrate diet, while others may notice that their training performance, recovery, and energy begin to suffer.
Vince swore the secret was fat, especially eggs. He called fertile eggs nature's anabolic steroid, and some of his guys ate 30 or more a day. Imagine sitting down to a breakfast of a dozen whole eggs and a slab of steak. For Vince, that was fuel, not excess. He claimed the yolk was packed with hormones and enzymes that help the body build muscle naturally, no drugs required. And unlike the bulk and cut crowd, his athletes didn't need to spend months trimming down before a contest. They lived in a constant state of readiness.
Calling fertile eggs nature's anabolic steroid is a brilliant bodybuilding expression, but we shouldn't take it literally. Eggs are nutritious food. They contain protein, fat, and many useful nutrients. But eating 30 eggs a day isn't something the average person needs to copy to build muscle naturally. And this is something we are going to find repeatedly with Vince. There is often a useful principle underneath the extreme presentation. The useful principle here is nutritional consistency. The extreme part is believing there is something almost magical about one particular food. And by the way, we still see this in fitness today, where one food, one nutrient, or one supplement gets presented as the solution to a poorly designed diet.
It wasn't just about food either. Vince was way ahead of his time when it came to supplements. Desiccated liver tablets by the handful, free-form amino acids, kelp, digestive enzymes, raw glandular extracts. His shelves looked more like a mix of a pharmacy and a butcher shop than a gym counter. Some doctors laughed, and nutritionists rolled their eyes. But Vince didn't care, because he wasn't chasing approval, he was only chasing results. And when his lifters stepped under the stage lights or onto a movie set, looking sharper and harder than anyone else, it was hard to argue with him.
Vince also used a huge number of supplements. Some of them may have helped fill genuine nutritional gaps. Others were probably given far more importance than they deserved. And I think the important lesson here is about priorities. Supplements can support a good diet and a well designed training program, but they should come after the basics are already in place. Because if your food, training, and recovery are not organized properly, adding more supplements is unlikely to fix the real problem.
Hollywood noticed. Stars desperate for a camera. Ready bodies started showing up at his gym, eager to test his rules themselves. And in time, so did the fitness world at large. Decades later, when low carb became a fad under names like Atkins, keto, or carnivore, old school lifters just shook their heads because Vince Gironda had been preaching steak and eggs long before it was trendy.
So, yes, Vince was talking about low carbohydrate diets long before they became fashionable again. But being first doesn't automatically make every claim correct. For an ordinary lifter, I wouldn't copy the exact food list. I would copy the discipline. Choose a diet that provides enough protein, controls your calorie intake, supports your training, and is realistic enough to follow consistently. Don't copy another person's diet simply because that person became lean. Look at the principles behind it. Vince controlled food intake, prioritized protein, and avoided uncontrolled bulking. Those are useful lessons. 30 eggs and almost no carbohydrates are optional details, not requirements.
Walking into Vince's gym, you'd realize pretty quickly that things didn't move the way you expected. A bench press wasn't really a bench press anymore, and a curl wasn't the curl you thought you knew. Vince had a habit of stripping an exercise down and rebuilding it, so it attacked the muscle exactly the way he wanted. Movements looked unusual, sometimes even awkward, but the results spoke for themselves.
This connects perfectly with the previous video about Francis Benfato. Can you actually shape a muscle through exercise selection? The answer depends on what we mean by shape. You can't change where a muscle begins and ends. You can't move your muscle insertions or change the width of your skeleton through a particular exercise. But you can develop some muscles more than others. You can build the shoulders, upper chest, and lats. You can control body fat, and by changing those proportions, you can dramatically change the overall appearance of the physique.
Take the guillotine press, sometimes called the neck press. Where most lifters swore by the flat bench, Vince dismissed it as a shoulder exercise in disguise. His fix was a wide grip, elbows flared, and the bar lowered high toward the base of the neck. Done right, it stretched the chest to its limit and built depth the flat bench never could. Done wrong, it punished your shoulders, which is why Vince drilled form like a hawk.
This is a good example of why we shouldn't copy an exercise simply because a legendary coach used it. The guillotine press places the bar very high on the chest, close to the neck, with the elbows widely flared. Some people might feel a tremendous chest stretch from that position, but it can also be very demanding on the shoulders. That doesn't automatically make it a bad exercise. It means that the exercise has to suit the person performing it. Your mobility, shoulder history, structure, and control all matter.
Then came the drag curl. Instead of swinging a barbell with momentum, lifters had to drag it up against their torso, elbows pulled back, shoulders locked. No cheating, no showboating, just pain and growth in the biceps. His sternum chin-up pushed things even further. Rather than stopping at the chin, you leaned back, arched hard, and pulled until your sternum touched the bar. Brutal, yes, but it carved detail into the lats in a way no standard pull-up ever could.
The drag curl and sternum chin up show how Vince thought. He wasn't satisfied with using the standard version of an exercise simply because everybody else used it. He changed the movement to create a different position and a different muscular emphasis. That is valuable, but unusual doesn't necessarily mean superior. The question is still the same. Can you feel and control the intended muscle? Can you perform the exercise without pain? And can you progressively improve your performance over time?
And then there were the Gironda dips. Unlike the upright triceps version, his had you leaning forward, chin tucked, feet crossed. You dropped deep, chest stretched like a bowstring, then drove back up. He swore nothing built the lower pecs better. Even sacred lifts weren't safe. Back squats, he claimed, ruined physiques with wide hips and glutes. His alternatives: sissy squats, hack squats, and front squats were designed to build thighs with clean lines instead of bulk. Word spread through Los Angeles that Vince had a different way of shaping a body.
This is where Vince's exercise selection becomes both intelligent and slightly dogmatic. He understood that small changes in position could change how an exercise feels and which muscles contribute most. That's useful. But he sometimes spoke as though one version of an exercise created the correct physique and another version destroyed it. The human body isn't quite that simple. Two people can perform the same exercise and experience it very differently because their limb lengths, mobility, and structure are different. Don't collect unusual exercises simply because they look advanced. Use an exercise because it solves a problem. Maybe it helps you to train a muscle you struggle to feel. Maybe it allows you to train without joint pain, or maybe it gives you a better range of motion. But if your standard exercise is already working, there is no price for replacing it with something more complicated.
If bodybuilding had a rule book, Vince Gironda seemed born to tear out the pages. While most trainers praised the squat as the king of lifts, Vince called it the killer of aesthetics. He swore it built thick hips and ruined the taper of the V shape. Other coaches thought he was crazy. Vince doubled down, promoting sissy squats, hacks, and careful foot placement to sculpt thighs without widening the waist.
Vince was clearly a contrarian, but he wasn't disagreeing simply to attract attention. Every argument returned to the same goal. He wanted the illusion of broad shoulders, a small waist, and balanced muscular development. The problem is that he sometimes presented his preferences as universal facts. Squats may develop the glutes and hips significantly in one person, while another person may squat for years and maintain a very narrow looking waist. Genetics still have a huge influence over the final result.
Steroids were another battlefield. As the golden era quietly embraced them, Vince stood his ground. He warned they would wreck physiques and shorten careers, urging lifters to stick with eggs, liver tablets, and sheer discipline. That earned him respect from purists, but ridicule from those chasing size at all costs.
This might be the part of Vince's philosophy that connects more strongly with this channel. Vince was strongly opposed to steroids and to the pursuit of size at any cost. And for a natural lifter, that distinction matters. You can learn from the professional bodybuilders. You can study their technique, effort, discipline, and exercise selection. But you can't assume that the training volume, recovery, or rate of muscular growth will apply equally to somebody training naturally. But we also need to be precise here. This documentary tells us that Vince opposed steroids. It doesn't prove that he personally remained completely drug free during every period of his life. So I wouldn't use this video to make a claim that we can't confirm. The important point is his philosophy. He believed bodybuilding should be built around discipline, food, intelligent training, and the quality of the physique rather than the maximum amount of mass a person could carry.
Even the judges clashed with his ideals. Vince believed the stage should reward symmetry and flow, but by the 1990s, men like Dorian Yates and later Ronnie Coleman were dominating with sheer mass. To Vince, it was proof that the sport had abandoned artistry for shock value.
And look how perfectly this connects with the last few videos. Ronnie Coleman represented the absolute extreme of muscular mass. Francis Benfato represented balance, presentation, and aesthetic control. And Vince Gironda believed that the entire sport was moving in the wrong direction when mass became the main objective. Now, I don't think Ronnie's physique can be dismissed as nothing more than shock value. The amount of development, work, and genetic ability required to build that body was extraordinary. But Vince was asking a different question. Does becoming bigger always make a physique better? And that's still one of the central arguments in bodybuilding today.
By the mid-1990s, money troubles and age forced his hand. Vince's gym closed, and in 1997, he passed away at 79. Yet his influence didn't die with him. His 8x8 training program is still called one of the hardest routines ever designed. His steak and eggs plan reappears constantly under modern names like keto or carnivore. The guillotine press, drag curl, and Gironda dip remain staples for those chasing physique detail over brute size. Today, Vince's name still sparks debate. Was he a genius ahead of his time or just a stubborn contrarian?
I think Vince Gironda was both. He was ahead of his time in understanding that bodybuilding and strength training are different activities. He understood the importance of exercise selection, training density, nutritional control, and staying lean enough to actually see the physique being developed. But he was also stubborn. He sometimes dismissed valuable exercises too broadly. He sometimes treated personal preferences as universal laws. And some of his nutritional claims went much farther than the evidence allowed. For the regular lifter, I wouldn't copy Vince Gironda exactly. I would copy the way he thought, question traditions, choose exercises according to your goal, train with precision, control your nutrition, and don't confuse moving more weight with automatically building a better physique. So, what would you choose? The greatest amount of muscle your body can possibly carry, or the amount of muscle that creates the best physique for your individual structure? And that was Vince Gironda, the Iron Guru, Decoded. See you in the next one.